Awesome. So this is part 2. I'm sharing my screen already? Yeah. So this is part 2 of our forms lecture because we haven't even gotten to the forms part yet. So we'll do that now. So I would like to make sure that everything we've done up until now makes sense and no one has any questions. I think in particular, one thing that may be a little bit more difficult to understand at first are these like ERB tags, the way that we're doing the iteration. Are there any questions about anything we've done so far in our controller, in our routes, in our view file?
Quick question on routes.
Yeah.
How would we define, is there a way to define a resources, like use resources to define a route to the root? The domain slash.
Yeah, not resources, but you can create a custom one. So
Okay.
like get,
Cool.
just slash,
Okay,
and
awesome.
then send it wherever you want it to. It's pretty common to have something like, you might have like a welcome controller where you'd have something like a home route, or maybe even, yeah, no, that's it.
That makes sense.
So this might look like, welcome, and then I don't know what, hello, whatever you call the index action.
Sure.
Awesome. Any
Okay,
other questions? Yeah. Can I get like a thumbs up or down on how you feel about the ERB tags or everything we've done in the view file here? Yeah, can't see all of you, but okay, cool. That looks pretty good. All right, so again, ERB tags, if we add the equal sign, that actually displays something on our page. So we're not adding the equal sign here to the iteration or our end because we don't want to display that Ruby code on our page. All right, so let's, now that we have an index of all of our dishes, I want to be able to go to /new and create a new dish. Let's do a little bit of error-driven development here. How do I fix this error right here?
Go to the dishes controller and define the new method.
Perfect. Exactly right. So now this, if I refresh, this should be enough to get me new error. So if I refresh, I get a new error that says missing a template. What do I have to do to fix that error?
In the views dishes folder, create a new .html.erb file.
Exactly. What if I wanted to name this something different, like my new file? Could I do that? And if so, what would I have to do in order to render that file?
You'd have to write render another page and then have that render to the my new HTML.
Exactly. So does someone know what the difference here is between if I write the render out and
explicit?
Yeah, explicit and implicit. Perfect. Thank you. So I'm explicitly rendering here. What's that?
How do you know when to render something or not?
Yeah, so if you are naming your files the same as your actions, you can just use implicit rendering. You don't actually need to like explicitly say, hey, go ahead. Like if this was actually just named new, right, .html.erb, I wouldn't have to explicitly tell Rails, go ahead and render my new page. It doesn't hurt if you do it. It just like does it automatically, so I don't have to think about it. If you want to somehow render a different page that does not match this action, then you would use the render keyword.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Other questions? All right, so since we're using the same name, the standard naming convention here, I don't have to explicitly render this. All right, so inside of our new file, let's create an H1, create a new dish. See if that comes up. Awesome. So we use some error-driven development here to get our page up and running. All right, so next thing we want to do is we want to actually, add a form to be able to create a new dish. We can, you've probably all gone through some of the HTML labs. We could hypothetically create like an actual HTML form if we wanted to, but Rails gives us a couple of helpers that we can use to create this form for us. There are a couple of reasons why we want to do this, and I'll show you what those are. I believe Daniel mentioned earlier seeing in one of the labs like an HTML output. We will actually take a look at what that looks like. So let's get started by creating a form with a form helper with Rails. The way that we have different types of form helpers that we can use. The most common form helper that you're probably going to be seeing in the labs is called Form4. Nowadays with Rails, since Rails 5, I think, there's another helper that's called FormWith. I'm not sure how much that's covered in the labs. It's not too different though from the Form4. So we're going to take a look at the Form4. We can also look at an example with FormWith, and I'll tell you what the differences are there. Let's start with the Form4. So Form4 is special because we generally use this if we want to build a form for some kind of object, for some kind of instance of one of our classes. So in this case, we want to create a new dish, right? So we're going to build a form for a dish, like a new dish. So we're going to say form4 at dish. And then what this form, let me make sure that I end this here before I forget that. And then what this form gives us is this, let me see, I don't want to get this wrong. There's like okay, so it gives us this this variable f. In this case, it's commonly called f. It doesn't really matter what you call this. But with this variable, you are able to, this is like a form builder object that will help you create input fields, label fields, checkboxes, whatever kind of like inputs you might want to have inside of a form. So we're going to use this variable. Again, it doesn't have to be called f, whatever you want to name it. And we're going to create a couple of input fields for a form. So like a pizza or a dish should have a name, right? So the way that we can create a new text field is by saying f.textfield. And then we have to tell Rails what we want to create this text field for. In our case, it's for the attribute of name. So we are able to do this. We're able to like take all these shortcuts because Rails gives us this form helper. And we're building this form helper around one of our instances of a dish. Now, you may ask yourself, this @dish variable, I didn't define that anywhere. And that's correct. That's one step that we still have to take. We haven't defined this @dish variable anywhere. Does someone remember, like, if I want to use an instance variable in a view, where do I usually define that instance variable?
In the action method in the controller.
Exactly right. So in my controller, in my new action, this is where I would define any kind of instance variables that I want to like send to my view. My views will automatically have access to all of these instance variables defined in that particular action that renders that view. So if I say @dish, and then I say dish.new, which will create a new dish. I am not actually going to create a new dish here. I'm just using this almost as like a placeholder to like build my form around, so that my form knows that a dish can have a name, a dish can have I already forgot size. I guess these are like pizzas, right? A dish can have
Easier
extra
not.
cheese. What? Cost? Or what was that? What did you say, Nathan?
I said cheesy or not.
Oh, cheesy or
Extra
not?
cheese.
Yes, exactly. So I'm using this like this new dish instance, even though we're not gonna actually use this to create a new dish. We're gonna create our new dish once we make our post request back to our controller. I'm using this dish instance to build our form around it again, so that we can Rails knows that a dish can have a name and all these other things. All right, so let's take a look, first of all, like what this looks like. If I refresh my page, I can see that I have an input field, right? This is not super exciting yet, but this is this one line of code that I wrote here that gives me that input field. Let me add a few more things here. So instead of this being a text field, let's create a label for a name that will add like a little label to my input field. And let's add a submit button. f.submit, I believe. Cool. And following like these Rails conventions, Rails will automatically like name your buttons a certain way, you know, create IDs for input fields. We'll take a look at in just a second what exactly is created. But all of these things are just like kind of Rails defaults. So this is called create dish because we are creating a dish. If we wanted to rename this, the label of that button, we can do that by just adding some text after. So if we want this button to be called submit for some reason, we can change that. So there are a lot of things that are done automatically for us, but we are usually able to make changes to those if we want to somehow modify our form. Obviously, we would be able to add styling or anything we wanted here as well. All right, let's take a quick look at what is created for us. I'm going to add some of the other input fields in just a second. I'm going to use my Chrome developer tools here to inspect my form that's been created. If you don't know how to do that yet, you can always right-click inspect or Command-Shift-J, right? No, that's downloads. Command, I always forget. Why can't I remember now? Someone remember?
Is the inspector.
What was that? Command-Shift?
Command-Shift-I, the inspector?
No, I don't know why that's not working. Command Option. Command Option I or Command Option J.
Okay.
We'll close and open it. Cool. So if we inspect this form, we can always right-click inspect, or you can use this little little arrow here to inspect a certain part on your page. If you click it, you can hover over what you want to inspect. So let's take a look at our form here. So let me make this a little bigger. All right, so our form, we didn't actually write any of this code, right? We just used this form helper that makes it possible for us to, like Rails creates that entire form for us. We just have to specify what kind of fields we want to have in it. So we have this form. There's really no magic going on here. Like Rails in the background has code that translates this piece of code into HTML code that has all of these attributes on it. So our form right here has a class of new dish, has an ID, all these other things. We have an action. This is super important. And we have a method as well. And then we have a couple of input fields. If we look at this, like go from the bottom here, we have our submit field. That's just our submit button, right? And then we have this input field for the name, like create a new name, and then we have this label. We have this other input field that has the attribute of hidden, and it has a name of authenticity token. Does someone know what this strange input field is all about?
Just as a guess, it tells the website that this is a request from, like it tells the server that this is a request from itself.
Yes, exactly.
And it
so
prevents
this is like
other websites from hijacking your connection.
Yeah, exactly. So this is something that's like automatically built in with Rails. And this is why like convention over configuration with Rails is so cool, because they build in these like these features, these security features that will prevent your site from being like misused, right? So one of those security features is this hidden input field with the authenticity token. Essentially, it says like whenever we're making a request, a post request from this form, we need to have this input token come with it so that wherever we're receiving that request, we can say, yes, this is correctly coming from within our site. Like this is one of our requests. Don't worry, like no one's trying to, you know, misuse your site.
So this would, like, if this would stop, for example, if I went into Postman or Insomnia and generated a post request, it wouldn't have the authenticity token, and it would deny the request.
Yes, I believe so. Let me think. It should, yeah. So you should have the authenticity token, and you can add the authenticity token with your request. Like you could send it with your request, but you have to send it in order for Rails to like say, yes, this is okay. This is a good request.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions about the authenticity token or like how our form was created? Like we have all these like input fields here. Any questions about any of these parts? So I believe, Daniel, that this is what you were talking about when in one of the labs they were showing like, you know, if you use this form 4, this is what's being created for you. So if you inspect your page, you can see all of these different fields. All right, so let's add a little bit. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, is there a way to add class and ID?
Yes.
To these tags?
Yeah. Let me see if I remember the syntax. I would just go into the docs to like look at the actual syntax. I think you can just add a comma and a class. Let's see if that works. Yep, so this adds the class right here.
What would be the purpose of adding like a class or ID within these fields, these F fields?
That's a great question. What's that, Alec? Yeah.
I was gonna say it's for CSS, so CSS can grab onto what it's formatting.
Oh, you mean like when you're doing HTML by itself and then you add a class or whatever, so then you can easily use. Okay, thanks.
Exactly. So if we had like an input field here, maybe we want the class to be like large input or something like that. And then within our CSS, we can target that, and we can like everything that has the class of large input, we can style in some way. Also, the ID, by the way, is important. Notice that when I click on this name label, my input field highlights, right? If I click into the input field, it highlights also, but if I click just on the label, my input field highlights. This is because my label has a for attribute that has a certain value, and my input field has an ID with that same value. This kind of links the label and the input field together, and it makes it possible to be able to click on this label. This is great for accessibility, and just kind of usability of the application improves a little bit.
And those labels or IDs should be unique per page. You shouldn't use dish_name multiple times on the same page.
Correct. So if we added another input field here with the same, with like a name as well, I think it will just kind of grab the first one it can find and highlight that one. But this one is like, it's kind of, you know, off to the side. Plus, so that's absolutely correct. Plus IDs in general should always be unique. So whenever you add an ID as opposed to a class, you want those to be unique per page. Actually, like unique probably per, like in your entire application. Cool, other questions here before we add some more input fields?
So just for formatting this page, would you still want to do a list, like an ordered or unordered list, and then style it with CSS, or would you just use breaks? this
So
form?
yeah, that's a good question. I would probably use CSS here in order to style this. We can do a little bit of that if you all want to. Let's create a couple more input fields so that we have something to work with. What did we have? Cost.
Cost size.
Size. Okay. Size. And then extra
then-
cheese, right? And extra
So then would
cheese.
you
So
just make that like a ticker?
that's a good question. Yeah. So extra cheese. Extra cheese. You might imagine this being something like a checkbox where it's like true. It's because it's true or false, right? I think. Let's try checkbox. I don't know exactly. No, it's. Let's look it up. Rails form for checkbox. Is it just check underscore box?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Nice.
Underscore. Cool. So we have this extra cheese, and here extra cheese. I feel like maybe the label should be to the right, so that now you have like name, cost, extra cheese. So we can also take a look at these label and input fields here if you want to, but there's nothing too different about them versus the first one we looked at. Actually, one other thing that I wanted to point out that's really important is this name attribute on our input field. Does someone know what this name attribute is good for on our input field?
Strong parameters when you submit the.
Yeah. So this is actually the name attribute will build the hash that we're going to send to our controller, and I'll show you what that looks like. And Rails does all of this for us in the background. But that is why we're using these like brackets. I'll show you exactly why we have to use the brackets here. It is kind of creating this hash that we're going to be sending to our controller eventually. And I think I already like mentioned this a little bit, but in our form tag, notice that we have this action to /dishes and the method of post. So this will make a post request to /dishes, which is which one of our, does someone remember which one of our RESTful routes is that? Post to / a plural.
Create.
Yeah, so we're creating a new item, right? So that's our create. That's exactly right. Okay. So yeah, let's do a little bit of styling real quick, I guess. So what I might do here is I might wrap each one of my input fields in some kind of wrapper. Give this a class of say input wrapper, right? And then I can go into my CSS and I can do a little bit of styling there.
What's the extension that you're using to get auto end tags on your HTML in ERB files?
So I believe it's just like auto, I don't know, auto complete or something like that. The key is though that I'm actually within my settings file, I have I'm routing my ERB tags to like I'm associating my ERB files with HTML code. So I'm not getting any of the ERB functionality, but I'm getting all of the HTML functionality. You can also always change that down here where it says HTML or ERB and like switch it to a different mode, and then it will act as if it's like an HTML file.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. And then I don't know if I have a particular extension for the HTML autocomplete. I feel like that's built into VS Code, but
it's built into VS Code, yeah.
Yeah.
Once it's helped,
Okay.
once it knows it's HTML, it just starts doing it.
Right.
That makes sense.
Cool. So I added all these input wrappers. First thing that's going to do if I refresh my page is it's going to put everything on top of each other because divs naturally take up 100% of the width of their parents. So each one of these divs is going to take up the entire width. So I'm gonna have my divs like on top of each other. So I can now take this input wrapper, and let's see where we have some CSS. Just let's write this in our dishes.scss. Automatic creates that for us. That's awesome. So one other thing I might want to do, and this kind of depends on how you want to build out your application, I can either select my input wrapper class just in general, right? Or I could say something like, go ahead and I could like wrap all of this inside of a div and then nest my CSS or my SCSS in order to make it specific for just that page. But if I want this to be on my entire in my entire application, I can just select this input wrapper class. Let's give this a little bit of padding. One other thing that I would recommend is use the tools that you have, the Chrome Dev tools that you have, to kind of check out what some of the styling might look like. So let's see, if I select my input wrapper here, I can now change any styling that I have here. So let's say if I want to change the padding a little bit, I don't really like it, I can do that by changing the styles. What's that?
It's really cool that you can actually just do that live without having to refresh the page.
Yeah, it's awesome. It doesn't change, it doesn't like save anything in a file, but you can just kind of try stuff out, which is super useful. So I think maybe I want to do no padding on the left and right, maybe top and bottom. And then I want to also probably target, maybe I want to have my inputs within that input wrapper have a width of 100%. I'm just kind of making some stuff up here. Maybe this doesn't really work for my Boolean here, but this is looking okay. I'm not loving it, but we might want to create like an overall width of this page to have. Let's see if we target our body, we can add some padding. Yeah, there are different things that we can do. This is just like one example. You can definitely take it a lot deeper. Any questions here about the styling part? And this, but Alec, did you have a question?
I was just gonna. I mean, I assume we're gonna get more into this later. I now have questions like, can you create a CSS file that everything reads, and then get more specific, or just like more specific questions like that? I don't know if we.
Yeah.
Like if I wanted to create a CSS file that just goes to the entire app and that everything reads, or do I need to create one for each individual controller?
Right. So if you have something that is more like general, you probably want to put that in your application CSS. That's
Okay.
like the overall style sheet. So that it would go for like any. I think actually the thing is that I think your these are not scoped to each page either. So if you put the styling in here, it would still apply to the rest of the application.
To everything.
It's just
okay.
more like separating out your code a little bit.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. I think I was planning on doing a little bit more on HTML, CSS next week. No, possibly the week after, because it's kind of like an extra topic that is not, we don't cover in depth in the curriculum or even in some lectures. It's just like extra stuff that I'm happy to go over with you when we have some time. Okay. Let's close some of this. Cool. So let's actually, we actually want to try out this form, right? We created this, and I'm gonna probably just take the class here away because that looks a little funky. Okay. So in order to create a new dish, like if we type something in here, right? Extra cheese, and we create a new dish. Let's see what happens. We're gonna get an error. How do we fix this error?
you need to have a create action within the controller.
Exactly. Let's do that. Awesome. And let's throw a binding.pry in here. And actually, we're in Rails. It'll probably be bybug. Binding.pry, bybug, pretty much the same thing. Just Rails comes with bybug out of the box. If we look at our gem file, we can see that bybug is automatically added to our Rails application. Okay, so we got our bybug in here, and we're going to create a new pizza, $20, and that's large with extra cheese. Create a dish. Awesome. So now in our where we had our server running, we're in our bybug, and we can kind of explore a couple of things. So for instance, the one thing that we're going to be using here is our params. Our params, if we take a look at those, we can see that our params have a certain piece of information in it. For instance, the authenticity token. We just talked about the authenticity token. This is something that Rails needs in order to make sure, yes, this request is actually coming from within the site, it's legit. Then we have some more information here. We have information about our dish. This is all the information that we just typed into our form, right? We got the dish name right here. We got the cost. We got the size. We got the extra cheese boolean. This is all information that we need in order to create our new dish. So we can now use this information from our params, and more specifically, we're actually going to build a little other little feature in, but we're going to start with just the params to create a new dish, right? So we can say @dish equals dish.new. And what do we want to pass in here? We have our params. If we grab our dish from that, we can see that now we get like just the information about a dish, right? So we could I just, how can someone tell me like how I would go about creating a new dish? If I say dish.new, what do I pass in here?
Name.
Cool. And what do I set the name to?
Params at
Params.
Params, dish, and then name, right? Because this is nested. Cool. So this will create a new dish with a new name. Obviously, we need some other stuff here, but this was successful. We can also now add the cost and the size and the extra cheese. Now this is great. We can totally do this, but it seems a little tedious. What if we had like 20 attributes?
I have a question. Why is dish and name within the brackets?
So we are, so these are keys of our hash, right? Our params hash. So we're selecting the key of dish, and here we're selecting the key of name.
Thanks.
So we have like a nested hash, yeah. And by the way, the reason that we have this nested hash is because of what we just looked at in our form. If we take a look at our form again, which we can't because we're like in limbo right now, I guess. If you remember that, we'll take a look at it after we're done with this. If you remember that our name attribute for each input field had this dish brackets name, right? Or dish brackets cost. That is where this nesting of our params hash comes from. So we are using dish as the top level key. And then under that, we nest name, cost, size, in order to create this nested hash, which will eventually allow us to not have to specifically say, hey, we want this dish to have this name, we want this dish to have this cost, but instead we can say something like, take this entire dish hash and go ahead and create a new dish from it. So if we omit the name, cost, and everything, and instead we use the hash that we get that already has the correct structure that we're looking for, we can create a new dish by just passing in our params dish. And we're getting some errors here, and we'll deal with that in just a second. But Essentially, we're passing in like the entire dish hash, which contains our name, cost, and everything already. Any questions here so far?
Can you explain that? Why instead of just having like the name, you can just do the full thing?
Yeah, because we have, let me see. Okay, so let me do a little bit of drawing. Okay, so we have our actually, let me write this out real quick. So this is what our hash looks like, right? We have our dish, which points to another hash. Let's break this up a little bit. That is going to have a name attribute, salami, and a cost, 20, and then, I don't know, size, right? Okay, so what we're doing here when we're selecting this particular dish brackets name is we are taking, we're taking this dish attribute right here. This is our first key in our params hash. And then we're drilling down to our name attribute. Our name attribute will return the string of salami. We're assigning that to our attribute of name, right? So this is like the standard way how we might do it. Now, because all we're really doing by creating a new dish like this is we're passing in a hash that has key value pairs. The key being name, the value being the actual string that we get from our params hash. The same thing for cost, right? This is essentially a hash that we pass in to create a new dish. Now, if we take away this like extra step of pulling every single value out, we can see that this params dish already is the correct hash that we need in order to create this new dish. So we already have the name, cost, and size in a hash format, and if we just pass that in directly, it will, translate that, or it will be no different to us doing it more manually.
And these values are being updated from the form, right? So then you input the form data, you press the submit, and then you now have a hash with these key value pairs, which are replaced by the form data that you created, and then you're passing it through here.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, thank you.
That's exactly right. And the key value pairs come from, and I'll show you. Let me actually exit this real quick so we can, or the bybug, so we can look at our form. Okay, so if we look at our form one more time, we can see that our input fields right here have this name attribute, right? This is where this params hash is being built. So notice this like dish brackets name, right? This dish right here creates this top level key of our params hash. And then the name is within that, within another hash in that top, within the dish, the value for the dish key. The value for each attribute, so like the actual name, like salami or 20 or large, will come from the value of the input field. Every input field has a value attribute, right? Even though you might not see that here, like printed out, whenever we type something in here, our value changes of that input field. The value is going to become the value of that particular key for that input field. So again, our key is directly related to our name attribute here, and the value comes from the value of the input field. Questions, or how do you all feel about that? Is that making sense, or yeah? Okay.
Could you go? Could you go over one last time why you can just pass in dish and not the rest of the params?
Yeah. Yeah, so let me see if I can. Okay, so essentially, this is our params hash, right? I'm just kind of mocking, like writing this out. So this is our params hash. Hope I'm not getting JavaScript and Ruby mixed up here. I think the syntax is right. So our params hash has this top level key of dish, right? So if we say like params bracket dish, that will give us everything that is that points to the value for that dish, right? So everything that I'm highlighting here, that is what's being returned when we print this out. The way that we are creating our dish up here, we say dish.new, and we say name is params, and so on. Add the cost as well. Cost, we'll just do those two. Essentially what we're doing is we are passing in a hash. So hypothetically, I could take this and I could say my super cool hash, right? I have to make sure that I wrap this in curly brackets, and then I can pass in this hash right here. This would be the equivalent of passing this in directly, right? So this is all that we're doing really, which is that we're, instead of passing these values indirectly, we are taking the params hash that already exists, that already has all of these values correctly formatted for us. That would be like right here. And we're taking that in order to create our new dish. So we can say params brackets colon dish, which will give us the value for that key, which is this hash right here. And that is essentially equivalent, to you know, writing this out one by one, except that we're using, why can't I think of the word?
Mass assignment?
Mass assignment, thank you, yes. We're using mass assignment in order to like make our lives a little easier, right?
Thanks. That makes sense.
Cool.
When is params introduced? Like
like in the labs?
or I guess in the labs or like within this, at what point do we have the ability to use like params? I don't know if that makes sense.
Like within our application?
Yeah.
Oh,
Is
so,
it created once we submit a form?
yes. So,
Okay.
so params, params serve two main purposes. One, getting information from a form. So just like we're doing once we hit submit, and we send that post request, remember, our form here is a post request to /dishes. Once we send that post request to /dishes, our controller, we're sending also the params hash. So to our controller, wherever we're receiving that information, which is in our create action. And it is our create action because in our routes file, well, we have resources here. Let's create so this would be our post to /. That's why I kind of like the writing this out a little bit, because it makes it a little bit clearer. So if we like follow our path of like a flow of data, we are starting with our input form, right? We hit the submit button, or we hit the submit button here. Rails Rails knows that this is a post request to /dishes, but it doesn't actually know which controller action it needs to go to. This is what we define in our routes. We have a post to /dishes, and we're telling Rails, hey, take this post to /dishes to the dishes controller and our create action. I'm just writing this out. I know that we have it from the resources already, but this is what it would look like written out. So Rails takes a look at the dishes controller and the create action. And then here, we are able to use the params that are coming from, that are being created from that form to create a new, you know, a new dish. So I said we usually use params for two main things. One, data from our form. So whenever we hit submit, we get the data within our params hash. Two, we use params whenever we have dynamic parts in our route. So if we have, you know, dishes/ID, we can grab this ID via our params hash, and we'll see what that looks like as well. For now, just remember that the params hash will get you the data from your form. Other questions? All right. Cool. Let me comment this out. I'll leave it in there if you want to take a look at it. All right. So one other thing that we need to do, this is another like security addition by Rails, is we're going to add something called strong params. What strong params do are they protect our application from malicious inputs. So hypothetically, someone could fake our request here, and instead of sending the name of pizza and the cost of 20, they can change what we are sending to the controller. So they might change, they might set a key with an attribute of like admin to true, right? So because we are able to kind of intercept this and send information that we might not want in our database, say we're actually creating a new user, right? And we set, and the like hacker or whoever wants to do us harm will add this attribute of like admin equals true, right? If we use something like mass assignment, like we're just doing right here, that attribute automatically is being added to our model. And obviously, like, they might not know exactly what your database looks like, but there's a slight chance that this would work, right? So in order to prevent this, we're going to tell Rails what attributes we want to permit. So there are only certain attributes that can be permitted when you're creating a pizza or a new dish, which is the name, the cost, the size, and the extra cheese, right? Those are the attributes that we permit. Everything else is not legit. And if someone else like sends these extra attributes to our controller, it would turn into an error. They would run into an error. So what we're going to be creating here is called strong params. And the naming convention here is if we have a dish, we would call this dish params, or pizza would be pizza params. And then we're essentially whitelisting certain attributes around our pizza or our dish. The way that we can do that is by saying params.require, and we want to require like our top level. This is going to be like our top level key. Remember, in the input field, our top level key is the dish. And if we look at this again, the top level key is the dish, right? It points to a hash of certain values. So our top level key here is dish, and we want to, like, on this dish, permit only certain attributes. So our name, our cost, our size, and our extra cheese. Cool. So now instead of using our params directly, and remember that we actually ran into this error when we tried to do this, we're going to use our dish params, which is this like in-between step of whitelisting only certain attributes. So we're going to say within the params, only these 4 attributes are legit. If there's anything else, ignore it or throw an error or something like that. So we're going to use our dish params here, which will include our name, cost, size, and extra cheese to create this new dish. Throw a BuyBug in here real quick to see what that looks like. All right, so if we refresh this page, new pizza, extra large, and then create the new dish. We can now take a look at our new dish that we just created. I don't know if you can see that. So this is our new dish right here, which has doesn't have an ID yet, but we'll get to that. It has a name, has a cost, has a size, and an extra cheese value. Also has the created at, updated at, which aren't filled out yet because of what we'll get to in a second. But this allows us now to create a new dish, and we are whitelisting only those 4 attributes. Everything else is not permitted. This is called strong params, and usually you'd have the strong params under like a private flag, which just means, this really just means like this method, any methods under this private flag are only accessible within this particular controller. Like you don't need to use this method anywhere outside of this controller.
And with the strong params, you can still type anything you wanted into the particular field, but it's avoiding some other malicious actor of inserting their own parameters into that field and it being accidentally interpreted.
Yes, correct. So what we could do, let's actually try this out. Let's try to be malicious here. What we could do, let's refresh our, get out of BuyBug and refresh our page one more time. All right, so I'm gonna go into this name right here. Imagine we were creating a user with an admin, Boolean. So if I go in here and I can edit this, I'm gonna change this to be admin. And then I'm gonna just hope this works. I'm just gonna say true. And then I'm gonna pass something else in here. It doesn't really matter. But point being, let's see. So if we submit this and we're in our, first of all, notice this little error that we get, unpermitted parameter admin, right? If we look at our params, we can see that we have an attribute here called admin that's set to true. So we just like messed with this form just in our Chrome console to submit something different.
That's simple.
And it's so easy to do, right? We can even like create additional input fields. We can be pretty bad. Any questions about this? Or and Rails is smart enough to like figure out, hey, this is not permitted, and that's exactly what these strong params are for.
So anytime you are going to have a form, you will want to, as best practice, create a separate definition of some type of strong params for that particular form or input action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So you want to say, a dish can only have a name, cost, size, and extra cheese, and everything else is just not permitted.
And there's no way to set that as an auto somewhere in the Rails application saying these are if the field is not explicitly set in the back end here, then ignore it. So you have to be explicit yourself.
Well, you have to like set it somewhere, and this is the place where we're setting it. If you're like just doing this via the form, then we could still mess around with the form here. So the place where we want to make sure that this doesn't go through is the controller. So this would be the right place, and I don't think there's like an automatic way to do that. I guess hypothetically, I mean, you could build in other kinds of like safeguards or something that make sure that no, this is really the best place, because say if you're creating a user, and maybe the user doesn't have an attribute of admin, right? Then this wouldn't do anything. But if the user does have an attribute of admin, and the person whatever gets lucky, then there's nothing that can prevent that from going into our database besides using these strong params. Other questions?
So if you have private, could you as like the creator inject like malicious things with the private? Not that I will, but it's like to
You
hijack
mean
like other things.
So you mean this private keyword?
Yeah.
The
Like can you
only
have? Go ahead.
I was just going to say the only reason that we have this private keyword here is to make sure that like these methods underneath are only available within this controller. It doesn't really have any other use case.
Okay.
But what is it exactly that you were trying to do?
Or I was like, so then if you're running the web page, never mind. Not really.
I mean,
What?
What's that?
What if I don't use the private? Like, do I have to put it under private?
No, you don't. This is just like, so generally in programming, we are trying to keep our scope as small as possible. So which controllers have access to what, which methods have access to which variables. The general like rule of thumb is try to make your scope the smallest it can be, and that's kind of what we're doing here by adding this private. Is we're saying this is only necessary within this controller. Just don't, it's not available anywhere else. That is really the main reason why, but it still work without it.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so let's actually create our new dish. So we have, we're saying dish.new. So if I say @dish down here, oh, I did the admin thing. Let's refresh this one more time. Okay, so new pizza 20. Oops. Anyway, so if I say @dish down here, how come my dish doesn't have an ID or created or updated app?
We didn't create it yet.
Yeah, so we created, what did we create and what haven't we done yet?
We created it with the new, but we haven't saved it because .create would create it and save it to the database, but only new just makes a short-term instance of it.
Correct. So new will create an instance of this new dish, but it won't save it in the database. So we can now say @dish.save, and that will save our dish. And now if we take a look at it, we can see that it has an ID and has all the other attributes that we specified. Okay, now why would we want to do this in like a two-step kind of way? Why don't we just say dish.create? The reason for that is error handling. So what if our dish was not created successfully? What if we had some kind of validations? You were doing validations yesterday, right? What if we have a validation? Where did our models go? Right here. Or our dish. Someone tell me how I make sure that there's always a name.
Validates, symbol name, comma, presence, colon, true.
All right. So this should validate that there's always a name. If there's no name, don't save it in the database. It's not valid. Let's jump back. Let's get out of this spy bug again, do this again, and submit a pizza without a name. Large. Great. Okay. So now if we look at our @dish, we can still see that, we have no ID. If we try to save it, we're going to get a false value back. It's going to tell us this was not saved, right? If we look at @dish again, we can see that this was not saved in the database. the reason that I don't want to just say create here and kind of do this step all in one is because now I can say if my dish was actually saved, and this will also run the save method, then go ahead and like, this is success. Sorry, I'm in JavaScript land here. Success, right? Else, something went wrong. So if I was able to save my dish, this is all successful. Otherwise, something went wrong, and we probably want to show the user an error message or something. That's the reason that I want to break up this new and save into two. One other cool thing that we can do with this is we can now say, we tried to save it, right? We can now say dish dot errors. See if I get that. Yeah, dot errors dot full messages. And this will give us all of the error messages on that dish. So we only had one validation that said the name can't be blank, but this is the one thing that is failing. So we are now able to like grab these error messages on that dish that was on the dish instance that was not saved. And we could hypothetically display that to our user, right? We could say, iterate over all the errors that we have, and we could say, and we could show the user that the name can't be blank. Let me paste this in here. That's something we want to do in our else, just so we have it there. Any questions about that?
And if we were to then like pseudocode out just line 15, the hashtag success, that would just redirect probably then to the confirmation page.
Yeah, maybe like the show page for this dish. But whatever you want it to be, you could send them to the index page. Yeah, so that's totally up to you. But you would want to, yes, you would want to redirect. Remember see if I can grab this again. This is our like general rule of thumb here for redirect or render. So this was, let's see, where's our post? A successful post, patch, or delete. This was a successful post, right? That means we're going to redirect. What do we do if it's an unsuccessful post, patch, or delete?
Re-render the page.
Yes. So this is a great example why we would want to use render versus redirect. And I kind of mentioned this earlier already, I think. So re-render new page. We as a user do not want to lose this. This is only like 3 input fields, but say you have like a big text field where you write like, I don't know, your diary or entry or something like that. And you submit and you did something wrong, if that was all just wiped out, like you'd be devastated, right? You just wrote all of this out, there was some kind of error, and like the page redirected you, but nothing was saved. That would be like really, really bad user experience. That is why we want to re-render our new page.
I think the Washington DOL page redirects you and erases everything.
Yeah, I've had it happen, and it's really frustrating. Okay, so let's make sure that we want to first redirect a user if it's successful, and we want to second render the new page if it's unsuccessful. So if the dish saves, we want to redirect to where might we want to redirect the user?
The dishes index.
Okay, so what do I need to write here after my redirect to get me to the dishes index?
Dishes underscore path.
Dishes underscore path. Perfect. And then if we want to render our new page, what's the syntax for that?
Render new.
Render new. Perfect. Let's continue and let's refresh our page. And let's create something without without a name. Hit create, and notice that we tried to submit, but we still have all of our values, and we should be showing some kind of error message here, obviously. But this didn't clear out our values, and Rails actually like does a lot of that work for us in the background of having this value attribute set. But point being is we can just go ahead and like create a new dish now and like enter, you know, our name without having to redo all of this other work. So now if we create the dish, what's that?
Just question, this is why we would use an instance variable for @dish instead of a local variable in the create method, because that way, like if I do render new, the new new page has access to @dish still. Okay,
that's exactly right.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because I should have mentioned that. So what Alec was just saying is that the reason that we have this be an instance variable, like what if we said, you know, we want to, we don't care about this being an instance variable, we make it local. The reason that this should be an instance variable is because on our new page, remember, we are using this dish in order to build a form around it. If we're using this dish instance variable, we can build the form around this like half created dish, right? So this is our dish instance that already has, what do we have? Like a cost and extra cheese value, right? So it will pre-fill that for you based on that instance of the dish. That's a really great point.
But in the new class on the controller page, one of them is dishes, and one is dish. So line 7 is dish, line 3 is dishes.
Yeah.
And
so
the difference between those two is that the new and the create are probably going to go together.
Yeah, so it's dishes here because this is like all of our dishes, right? We could name this whatever we want as long as in our index view we are using that correct instance variable. We can name this potato, right? But then in our view we have to make sure that we call this potato. So it doesn't really matter what we name that, but you're correct that it does matter when we want to use when we like are creating something new but it fails, this right here has to match our line number 7, what it's called here, because we're using the same variable name in our new page, and it will, if we named this something else, it would not match what we have right here. It has to match our form that we're building it for, what we're building it for.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
So after a redirect, that instance variable would be gone, but after
Correct.
a render, it's still there.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
So that's a big difference between render and redirect. What redirect does is it creates a new HTTP request, right? So we're redirecting to dishes path, which is going to be our index. So we're actually redirecting the user to this action right here, right? And what it means when we make a new HTTP request, it means that we are losing all data. HTTP requests are always stateless. We cannot keep this this dish variable around from one HTTP request to the next, but we can keep it around if we render a page. That's not an HTTP request that we're making. We are just rendering a different kind of view, or in this case, really the same view. But other questions? Okay. So now we're able to create new dishes, right? We have our kind of error handling set up correctly. We might want to, like as a next step, and we'll probably do that tomorrow, we want to make sure that we actually show the user some kind of error message that will let them know like what what piece of the form they were missing or what went wrong. Let me see if I forgot something. I think that's it. Any last questions? How do you all feel about this?
A lot more confident thanks to you today.
Okay, cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you. Like this last piece especially really gave it some context because I had started cutting my code down to use local variables and .create because it was less code. And now that I see this, I'm like, oh, I was doing it wrong.
And remember that that this really, like in the new page, we're really saying this, right? We're rendering the new page. So maybe that makes it almost a little clearer even.
Can you scroll down to the private part?
Mm-hmm. This is almost always going to look the same, right? So this is just certain syntax that we have to use to make sure that we are permitting the correct attributes. In fact, a lot of this code is going to be a little bit repetitive from one controller to the next if you have just full CRUD actions. So like just like knowing the syntax and understanding a little bit what's going on in the background is helpful. But there is a certain pattern to this that you can hypothetically look up on the in the Rails docs.
I've been coding along, but I just called it, instead of dishes, I just called it pizza. So I'm getting now a no method error in pizza #new. And I thought I have had all the variables named correctly. But is there a way that they kind of figure out the debugging of this, where kind of what the common issues are, such as maybe something with the name?
Yeah, would you mind sharing your screen?
Yeah.
Cool, let me stop sharing and then we can debug that.
And quick question while that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And is it common practice for a new, like for the new action to do a dish.new and then pass that blank object onto the form?
Yes.
Great.
It says I'm sharing my screen, but I don't see the border. Do you guys see the code and the web browser?
Yeah,
we can see it.
I think
Okay.
they removed the border recently. I'm not sure why, but yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. So the one thing about Form 4, let's see, you have to make sure that, first of all, like you have to make sure that you have the equal sign for the Form 4. That is the first thing that I'm seeing. Okay, cool. And then, yeah, cool. So do you have undefined method pizzas path? So can someone like talk about maybe what
Really quickly, you have a what's it called? Syntax error where it says f.label size, you have an extra s.
Right here.
Where?
On line 10.
Line 10.
Nice.
And then the checkbox is missing an E. It says extra ches.
Group debugging, I love it. Cool.
And then
yeah, so
pizza's path, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Pizza's path probably isn't showing up because right now your controller is named singular, so it's pizza controller. So we would want to look at your route to see if it's actually, because right now pizza controller with naming conventions should be pizza's controller.
Mm-hmm.
But should that, and the database would need to be also
Pizzas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but then the model, the individual model would be class pizza, and then your route, yeah, and then it would name properly because pizza path would go to a specific show page, and then pizza's path would go to the index page. Go to your terminal and type those routes.
Yeah, so I think there in one of the labs, there's like a little table about like what needs to be plural, what's going to be singular. That is really important in Rails. So make sure that you follow those conventions.
And then it was Rails routes.
Yeah.
You can also always go to like /Rails info/routes, I think. Like on it would be localhost, yeah.
If it's running a server currently.
Right, if the server is running.
It is Rails.
And then /routes, yeah.
Or,
But yeah, you have to make sure that your server is running. I don't know if you stopped that here.
No.
Oh,
No, my computer's also slow to get some of this stuff.
That's all right.
okay, yeah, so it had a routing error there. Oh yeah, there you go. So then pizza format, pizza.
So if you make this a little larger, we can see the path. So expand it a little bit, exactly.
Yeah,
and
there
then
you go.
We'll scroll, yeah, there we go. If we scroll to the left, you can see your paths here.
There you go.
So you only have a pizza path. You do not have a pizzas path.
Because the route isn't plural, so it's how it solved it is it did pizza index.
Right. This is how, so hypothetically, it would have a pizza index path, but at this point you should make sure that you have your pluralization correct.
Gotcha, okay, I'll dig into that then.
Actually, if you go to your routes real quick, your like routes file, sorry,
gotcha.
wherever you
Okay.
have your routes file in, this should be pizzas.
Interesting, and then should not the controller then be called pizzas too? And at some point the database needs to maybe DB.
And then also make sure you have your file name correct with the pizzas plural for the controller.
Table pizzas.
That looks good, yeah. Yeah, it's all just, a little bit tedious work at first, but once you get used to it, and when you use the generators, it does a whole lot of that work for you. So it's kind of nice. And also, I think this might not be as important anymore in like Rails 5 or 6. Whenever you change your routes file, you should restart the server. I haven't had a whole lot of trouble with it. I think they probably maybe updated something, but it's always good practice. All right, does anybody else have any other questions before we end that here?
Thank you, it definitely clarifies a lot of things.
Cool, awesome. Let me stop.